If you'd told me 6 months ago that my life would unravel because of a stuffed animal business, I would have laughed hard. It started innocently enough, a joint venture to bring some extra income into the household. My wife, Claire, was always great with her hands, and when she suggested creating a line of children's plush toys, I thought it was brilliant. The market for those things was booming. Parents would pay top dollar for something cute, safe, and handmade. Claire threw herself into it with the kind of energy that had once made me fall in love with her. And I was happy to help, even if it meant stepping out of my comfort zone. She quit her corporate job to make the dream a reality, and I joined her after hours, cutting fabric, managing finances, and even sketching a few designs. Our little daughter, Lily, loved visiting Mommy's office. It became a family thing. That was, until the cracks began to show. The first crack was small. Claire was staying later and later at the workshop, calling it essential overtime. I'd pick Lily up from daycare and handle bedtime, expecting Claire to return home exhausted but satisfied. Instead, she'd come back distant, distracted. Her excuses seemed plausible at first: tight deadlines, supplier delays, meetings with new clients. Then, one night, curiosity got the better of me. It wasn't a grand plan, nothing that screamed, "Aha, I've got her." I'd finished putting Lily to bed and was passing Claire's workshop on my way to pick up groceries when I saw the light still on. Normally, I'd have called or texted her to see if she needed anything, but this time, something stopped me. I decided to go in, thinking I'd surprise her with coffee and a kiss on the forehead. I wish I'd thought twice. Pushing open the door to her office, I was hit by the faint smell of lavender, her favorite candle scent. But that wasn't what made me pause. I heard laughter, muffled but unmistakably hers. My stomach tightened. I edged closer, my steps silent against the industrial carpet. That's when I saw it, Claire, standing by her desk, her hands trembling as she unbuttoned her blouse. She wasn't alone. A man, Jason, one of the employees she'd hired to handle logistics, stood opposite her. The smile on his face was confident, knowing. For a moment, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. It didn't fit with the Claire I knew, the Claire who cried when we first brought Lily home, who whispered promises of forever on our wedding day. I must have made a sound, because Jason's head snapped toward the door. His face paled. "Hey, I didn't see you there." Jason stammered, his voice too loud, too casual. Claire froze, her hands still on the buttons of her blouse. She turned to me, her eyes wide and glassy. "Mark, it's not what it looks like," she began, her voice cracking. For the first time in my life, I didn't know what to say. My tongue felt heavy, my body leaden. My gaze darted between the two of them, taking in the scene, the flush on her cheeks, the nervous shuffle in Jason's stance. "What exactly is it, Claire?" I finally managed, my voice hoarse. "Because from here, it looks like you were about to." "Stop," she interrupted, her hands flying up as if to ward off my words. "Please, Mark, let me explain." But I wasn't ready to listen. Not yet. I turned on my heel and walked out, ignoring her calls after me. My heart pounded in my chest as I got into my car and drove, not knowing where I was going but knowing I couldn't stay. And that was just the beginning. I drove aimlessly that night, my mind caught in a whirlpool of disbelief and anger. The streetlights blurred into streaks of orange and white as I replayed what I'd seen over and over. Every detail of Claire's face, her guilt, her shock, burned into my mind. How had we ended up here? When I finally pulled into our driveway, the house was eerily quiet. Lily was fast asleep, her little body curled around her favorite stuffed bunny, one of Claire's early creations. I envied her peace. Sitting in the darkened living room, I debated what to do next. My chest was tight, my throat dry. Confront her again? Demand answers? Or pretend I'd seen nothing, for Lily's sake? The sound of Claire's car pulling into the driveway decided for me. I listened to her footsteps on the porch, the slow creak of the door opening. "Mark," she called softly, hesitating. She must have spotted my silhouette in the dark. "Can we talk?" I flicked on the lamp. The light washed over her pale face and disheveled hair. She looked nothing like the composed, ambitious woman I'd built my life with. "You want to talk?" I said, the bitterness sharp in my tone. "Now you do." Claire flinched but stepped closer. "Please, Mark. It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it was." Her mouth opened and closed, like she was searching for the right words. But all she offered was, "It was a mistake." "A mistake?" My laugh was hollow. "I walk into your office, and you're undressing in front of Jason, and that's a mistake. Did your clothes just fall off, Claire?" Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't care. My anger had built a dam against any sympathy. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she whispered. "What? Me finding out? Or you crossing the line?" She collapsed onto the couch, her head in her hands. "Mark, I never meant to hurt you." "That's not an answer," I snapped. "You hired me, Claire. You brought me into this business. Was that part of the plan? To humiliate me?" "No." Her head shot up, panic in her eyes. "It wasn't like that. Jason and it started small. I didn't mean for it to get out of hand." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. She wasn't denying it. "Do you love him?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "No, Mark. It's not about love. It was stupid, okay? A stupid distraction." "Distraction from what?" She hesitated, then looked away. "From feeling stuck. From feeling like I've lost myself." I stared at her, struggling to make sense of it all. "You felt stuck, so you risked our marriage? Our family?" "Mark, I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I know I've made a mess of everything. I'll fix it. I'll quit the business if that's what it takes. I'll do whatever you want, just don't give up on us." I wanted to believe her. For Lily's sake, for the life we built together. But the image of her and Jason, the way she looked at him, haunted me. "I don't know if I can do this," I said finally, standing up. "Not tonight." Claire reached out as if to stop me, but I was already heading for the stairs. That night, I lay awake in the guest room, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on me. Did she mean what she said? Could I forgive her? Or was this just the beginning of the end? The next morning, Claire acted like a stranger in her own home. She avoided my gaze, tiptoeing around me as if I might explode at any moment. Part of me wanted to confront her again, force her to tell me everything, but I couldn't stomach another conversation filled with half-truths. I needed clarity, not more excuses. After dropping Lily at daycare, I decided to take matters into my own hands. Instead of heading to work, I drove to Claire's workshop. My pulse quickened as I parked a block away, unsure what I was looking for but certain I had to start somewhere. The space was locked up, the blinds drawn. I let myself in with the spare key Claire had given me months ago, my hands trembling. Inside, the workshop was eerily still, the faint scent of lavender lingering in the air. Everything looked normal, boxes of fabric neatly stacked, finished toys waiting to be shipped. But when I reached Claire's desk, I noticed something odd, a second phone sitting under a stack of papers. Claire had never mentioned a second phone. I hesitated, my mind racing. Could this be the key to what she wasn't telling me? Picking it up, I pressed the power button, and the screen lit up. A passcode. Of course. Frustrated, I placed it back and glanced around, looking for any other clues. On the corner of her desk sat a notebook. Flipping through it, I found schedules, notes about upcoming product launches, Anne. Jason's name. His name appeared repeatedly, marked in shorthand notes next to meetings and coffee runs. My chest tightened. It didn't prove anything, but it painted a picture I couldn't ignore. The sound of footsteps snapped me out of my thoughts. My heart leapt as I quickly placed the notebook back where I'd found it and ducked behind a shelf. The door creaked open. "Claire," a voice called softly. "Jason." I peeked through the shelves, catching sight of him standing in the middle of the room, his phone pressed to his ear. "No, I haven't heard from her yet," he said, his tone low and casual. "Yeah, last night was close. Too close." I clenched my fists, struggling to keep my breathing quiet. "She's probably dealing with him now," Jason continued, pacing. "But don't worry. It's fine. I've got her under control." The words hit me like a blow to the stomach. My mind spun, questions colliding with anger. Under control? What did that even mean? Jason's call ended, and he lingered for a moment before turning and leaving. I stayed frozen in place, my heart pounding as the door clicked shut behind him. I needed answers, real answers. If Claire wouldn't give them to me, I'd find them myself. That evening, I sat across from Claire at the dinner table, watching her pick at her food. Lily chattered happily about her day, blissfully unaware of the tension hanging in the air. Once Lily was in bed, I cornered Claire in the kitchen. "Who else knows?" I asked, my voice low but firm. Her eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "Jason," I said sharply. "I heard him today at the workshop. He said he's got you under control. Care to explain that?" Claire's face turned pale, and she took a step back. You were at the workshop. Answer the question, Claire." She looked down, her hands trembling. "It's not what you think," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then tell me what to think," I snapped. She hesitated, then shook her head. "I can't, Mark. Please, just, give me time." "Time?" I laughed bitterly. "Time for what? For him to call you again? For you two to figure out your next move?" "It's not like that," she cried. "Then what is it like?" I demanded. Claire opened her mouth but said nothing, tears brimming in her eyes. She looked away, her silence louder than any confession. I walked out of the room, slamming the door behind me. Whatever this was, it wasn't something she was willing to share. If I wanted the truth, I'd have to find it myself. That night, I couldn't sleep. Claire's tears replayed in my mind, but so did Jason's words. "I've got her under control." It felt like a puzzle, and the more I tried to piece it together, the more fragmented it became. By morning, I had made a decision. I needed more information, something concrete. Claire's vague explanations and Jason's cryptic comment weren't enough. I started with the phone. After Claire left to drop off Lily at daycare, I searched the workshop again. The phone was gone. My stomach sank. Had she guessed I'd seen it? With no other leads, I did the one thing I'd never imagined I'd have to do, I called a private investigator. Frank Callahan, the investigator, was direct. "The sooner I start, the better," he said over the phone. "What's the situation?" I hesitated before answering. "My wife's hiding something. I don't know the full extent, but there's a guy. Jason. He works with her." Frank's tone softened. "I understand. We'll get to the bottom of it. Give me a few days." I hung up, conflicted. Hiring someone to follow Claire felt invasive, but I needed clarity. For Lily, for myself. By the second evening, Frank called back. "I've got a lead," he said. "Your wife met Jason at a cafe downtown earlier today." My chest tightened. "Did they?" "Nothing physical," Frank assured me. "But their conversation was intense. I recorded parts of it. I think you'll want to hear this. When I met Frank, he handed me a USB drive. I played it in my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel. Claire's voice crackled through the recording. We can't keep doing this. Mark is suspicious. Jason's response was calm, almost smug. Relax. He doesn't know enough to do anything. Just stick to the plan. The plan? Claire's voice wavered. You want to save the business, don't you? Jason pressed. The recording ended, leaving me with more questions than answers. Save the business? What was he talking about? Driving home, I resolved to confront Claire again, this time armed with what I'd heard. Claire was in the living room when I walked in, her laptop open, a pile of fabric swatches on the coffee table. She glanced up, her expression cautious. You're home early, she said. I didn't respond. Instead, I set my keys down and took a seat across from her. My heart raced, but I kept my voice calm. I need to know the truth, Claire. About Jason. About what's going on at the business. Her face tensed, and she closed the laptop. Mark, we've been through this. No, I interrupted, my voice sharp. We haven't. And I'm done waiting for you to come clean. I know you've been meeting him outside of work. I know there's more than you're telling me. She froze, her hands gripping the edge of the laptop. You're following me. Don't turn this around, I shot back. You think I don't deserve answers? After everything I've given to this family, to your business? Claire looked down, her shoulders slumping. It's not what you think, she said softly. Then tell me what it is, I said, leaning forward. Because right now, it looks like you're lying to me. About him. About us. Her lip quivered. Jason, he's been helping me. With what? With the finances, she said quickly. The business has been struggling, Mark. I didn't want to tell you because I knew you'd worry, Anne. Jason had ideas to keep it afloat. What kind of ideas? I demanded. She hesitated. He suggested cutting some corners. Things I wasn't comfortable with. That's all. I shook my head. That's not all, Claire. You were undressing in front of him. Were you cutting corners then too? Her cheeks flushed. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? She stood, pacing the room. It was a mistake, okay? I let it go too far. But it's over now. I swear. The words rang hollow, and I could feel my anger rising again. Why didn't you tell me we were in trouble? I could have helped. Claire stopped and turned to me, tears streaming down her face. Because I didn't want you to think I'd failed. This was my dream, Mark. And I didn't want to drag you down with it. Her confession softened something in me, but it didn't erase the betrayal. So instead, you trusted Jason. You let him be the one to help you. She sank onto the couch, her face buried in her hands. I didn't mean for it to get so out of control. I was scared. For a moment, I stared at her, unsure what to say. Part of me wanted to believe her, to cling to the idea that this was all a desperate, misguided attempt to save her business. But the memory of Jason's words, the smug confidence in his voice, wouldn't let me. I don't trust him, I said finally. And right now, I don't trust you either. Claire flinched but said nothing. We're not done talking about this, I added, standing. But first, I'm going to find out exactly what Jason's plan is, and why he's so confident he has you under control. I walked out before she could respond, my resolve hardening with every step. The next morning, Claire barely spoke. Her silence hung heavy over breakfast, interrupted only by Lily's cheerful chatter. I left the house early, telling Claire I needed time to clear my head. In truth, I was meeting Frank again. Frank greeted me with his usual no-nonsense demeanor. I've dug a little deeper into Jason, he began. It turns out he's had financial troubles for years, bad debts, a few failed ventures. But here's where it gets interesting. He handed me a file. Inside were photocopies of contracts, emails, and bank transactions. These, Frank said, tapping the documents, show he's been funneling money out of your wife's business. My breath caught. How much are we talking about? Enough to make a difference, Frank replied grimly. I'd estimate at least $50,000 over the past 6 months. I clenched my fists, the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. And Claire doesn't know? I doubt it, Frank said. He's been careful. He masks the transactions as supply expenses. But here's the kicker, he's tied to a shell company that's listed as one of her suppliers. I stared at the papers, my mind racing. So he's been playing her this whole time. Pretending to help while lining his pockets. Frank nodded. It looks that way. I don't think your wife is fully complicit, but she's definitely been manipulated. The word manipulated stuck with me. Claire's guilt, her desperation, it all pointed to someone who felt trapped. And Jason had been pulling the strings. What's the next step? I asked, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. I'd suggest confronting him, Frank said. But not without backup. You need to be smart about this. That evening, I arrived home determined. Claire was in the kitchen, staring out the window with a mug of tea in her hands. We need to talk, I said. She turned, her expression wary. About what? About Jason, I replied, stepping closer. And about how he's been stealing from you. Her eyes widened. What are you talking about? I set the file on the counter. This. Frank dug up everything. He's been using your business to cover his debts. Claire hesitated, then opened the file with trembling hands. As she scanned the documents, her face paled. I didn't know. That's the problem, I said, my tone sharp. You trusted him over me. You let him get close enough to ruin everything. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't back down. I'm going to fix this, I said firmly. But Jason needs to go. Now. Claire nodded slowly, her voice barely audible. You're right. He's out. For the first time in weeks, I felt like we were on the same page. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Jason wouldn't go quietly. And I wasn't wrong. The following day, Claire called Jason to meet her at the workshop. I insisted on being there, hidden in the back office. She wasn't thrilled about the arrangement, but I made it clear this wasn't negotiable. Jason arrived late, as if he had nothing to worry about. He strolled in with his usual confidence, a coffee in hand and a smirk on his face. What's this about, Claire? He asked, leaning casually against the desk. Claire's hands shook as she gripped a folder filled with the documents Frank had uncovered. Jason, we need to talk about the money. Jason's smirk faltered, but only for a moment. What money? The money you've been siphoning out of the business, she said, her voice stronger than I expected. Jason straightened, his casual demeanor slipping. I don't know what you're talking about. Claire opened the folder and slid the papers across the desk toward him. These say otherwise. Jason's eyes flicked over the documents, his jaw tightening. This is a misunderstanding, he said smoothly. You know how complicated the supply chain is. These expenses are normal. Normal? Claire shot back, her voice rising. You think stealing from me is normal? Jason took a step closer to her, his tone low. Watch yourself, Claire. You don't want to accuse me of something you can't prove. That was my cue. I stepped out of the office, and Jason froze when he saw me. Actually, Jason, I said, keeping my voice calm, we can prove it. Every dollar. Every fake invoice. Jason's eyes darted between me and Claire, his confidence slipping further. This is a private conversation, he said, trying to regain control. Not anymore, I replied, crossing my arms. You're done here. Pack up your things and don't come back. Jason glared at me, then turned to Claire. Is this what you want? Claire hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Yes. You've taken enough from me, from us. Jason let out a bitter laugh, grabbing his bag. You're making a mistake, Claire. Good luck running this place without me. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. When he was gone, Claire sank into a chair, her face pale. Do you think he'll come after us? I shook my head. Not if he knows what's good for him. Frank will keep an eye on things, just in case. Claire nodded, but her shoulders remained tense. What now? She asked quietly. I sat across from her, the weight of the past few weeks settling over us. Now we figure out where we go from here. Together or not. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't argue. For the first time, it felt like she understood the gravity of what she'd done, not just to the business, but to us. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to rebuild what we'd lost. The days following Jason's departure were quieter, but not easier. Claire and I operated like business partners rather than a married couple, coordinating daycare drop-offs, running the business, and barely exchanging more than the essentials. It was as though an invisible wall had been erected between us, one that neither of us knew how to break down. Frank sent a final update: Jason had left town. No further suspicious activity, no signs he'd tried to retaliate. Claire seemed relieved, but I couldn't shake the unease. People like Jason didn't walk away without leaving some damage behind. The tension came to a head one evening as we sat across from each other at the dinner table, Lily happily scribbling in her coloring book nearby. We need to talk, Claire said, her voice trembling. I set my fork down, bracing myself. I'm listening. I want to make this right, she began, her eyes pleading. I want to fix things between us. Her words sounded sincere, but I couldn't ignore the hurt still simmering inside me. Claire, I need to know something, I said, leaning forward. Was it just the business? Or was there more with Jason? She hesitated, and for a moment, I thought she wouldn't answer. It wasn't physical, she said finally. But, there was something emotional. I was vulnerable, and he made me feel like he understood. It wasn't right, and I'm so sorry. Her honesty hit me like a gut punch. The confirmation of what I had feared left me reeling, but it also felt like a small step toward clarity. And what about us? I asked. Was I not enough for you to talk to? To lean on? Her face crumpled. You've always been enough, Mark. But I didn't want to burden you. You already carry so much for this family, and I was scared of disappointing you. I let out a bitter laugh. You think this is less disappointing? She reached across the table, but I pulled my hand back. I know I hurt you, she said, tears streaming down her face. And I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. But I love you, Mark. I love our family. Please don't give up on us. Her words hung in the air, heavy with desperation. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust her again. But something inside me hesitated. I don't know if love is enough right now, I said, my voice quiet but firm. This is going to take time. If we even have a chance. Claire nodded, wiping her eyes. Whatever it takes, she whispered. As I got up to clear the table, Lily tugged at my sleeve. Daddy, are you and Mommy mad at each other? Her wide, innocent eyes pierced through me. I knelt beside her and pulled her into a hug. We're just working through something, sweetheart, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But no matter what, we both love you. Always. Claire's quiet sobs filled the room as Lily clung to me, and for the first time, I realized the hardest part of this wasn't just what Claire and I had lost. It was figuring out how to protect the one thing that still mattered, our daughter. The days stretched into weeks. Claire and I settled into a strained routine, our conversations careful and brief. At times, I caught her watching me, as though trying to gauge where I stood, but I gave little away. The wound was still too raw, and the trust too broken. But Lily? She was a bright, unyielding force. Her laughter filled the house, cutting through the tension in ways neither of us could manage. Every moment with her reminded me of what was at stake. One evening, as Claire put Lily to bed, I sat alone in the living room with a mug of coffee. My mind wandered back to the good times, the late nights laughing over silly movies, the quiet mornings when we'd plan our future over pancakes. Those memories felt like they belonged to a different life, to a version of us that no longer existed. Claire joined me after a while, sitting on the far end of the couch. The distance between us was palpable, but so was the weight of everything unsaid. "Mark," she began softly, "I know I've lost your trust. I don't expect to earn it back quickly, but I need to know if there's still hope." I stared into my mug, unsure of how to answer. "I don't know," I said finally. "Some days, I feel like we can get through this. Other days, I feel like we're too far gone." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I understand. I do. But I'm not giving up, Mark. I'll do whatever it takes." Her determination surprised me, but I wasn't ready to meet it with my own. "If we're going to try, we need more than promises, Claire. We need counseling. We need honesty. And I need time." "Okay," she said immediately. "I'll find a counselor. We'll go, together. And," I added, "no more secrets. About the business, about Jason, about anything." She nodded again. "You have my word." It was a start. A fragile, hesitant start, but a start nonetheless. In the weeks that followed, we began counseling. The sessions were awkward and painful at first, forcing us to confront emotions we'd buried. But they also brought moments of clarity. Claire admitted to how overwhelmed she'd felt running the business, how she'd convinced herself that leaning on Jason was harmless until it wasn't. I admitted to my own failures, to how I'd been so focused on providing for our family that I'd overlooked her struggles. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't always productive, but it was something. One afternoon, while organizing some of Lily's toys, Claire called me into the room. "Look," she said, holding up a small, slightly crooked stuffed rabbit. It was the first one she'd ever made, back when the business was still a dream. "Do you remember how excited we were about this?" I nodded, the memory tugging at my chest. "I don't want to lose that," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't want to lose us." For the first time in months, I saw a flicker of the Claire I'd fallen in love with. It wasn't a solution, but it gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The months that followed were a mix of progress and setbacks. Counseling became a weekly ritual, and while some sessions felt like we were clawing at old wounds, others offered glimmers of understanding. Each step forward felt tentative, as if we were learning how to be married all over again. Claire put the business on hold. She said she needed to focus on fixing herself and our family before diving back into the work that had consumed her. I appreciated the gesture, though I knew it wasn't an easy decision for her. One evening, she surprised me. "I've been writing down my thoughts," she said, holding out a small notebook. "Things I've realized about us, about what I did wrong, and what I want to do better." I hesitated before taking it, unsure if I was ready to open the pages. But her vulnerability was real, and it reminded me of the woman I'd fallen for years ago, the one who wasn't afraid to lay her heart bare. "I'm trying, Mark," she said softly. "I can see that," I replied. "And I'm trying too." One Saturday, Lily asked if we could go to the park. It was one of those crisp, sunny mornings where the world feels alive, and for the first time in a long while, Claire and I felt more like a team than two people tiptoeing around each other. As Lily played on the swings, Claire sat beside me on the bench, her hand resting near mine. For a moment, we sat in silence, watching our daughter's carefree laughter fill the air. "I miss this," Claire said suddenly. "Just us, being a family." I looked at her, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of warmth that hadn't been there in months. "I do too," I admitted. Her eyes searched mine. "Do you think we'll get there again?" I sighed, my gaze shifting to Lily. "I think it's possible. But it's going to take time." "I'm willing to wait," she said, her voice steady. Over time, the cracks in our relationship didn't disappear, but they began to heal. Claire's honesty, though painful at first, became the foundation for something new. Trust wasn't rebuilt overnight, and I wasn't sure it ever would be what it once was. But we kept showing up for each other. For Lily. One evening, as we tucked her into bed, Lily hugged us both tightly and said, "You're the best mommy and daddy ever." Claire and I exchanged a look over her head, and in that moment, I felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not yet. But acceptance. The road ahead wasn't clear, but for the first time, it felt like we were walking it together. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.